This video, we're going to be exploring the Kazimierz district of Krakow, which is also known as the Jewish Quarter, and particularly focusing on sites that are important to Jewish history in this neighborhood. So when I moved here from Los Angeles last month, I made Kazimierz my home. This building right behind me, the white building, it's now a museum of kind of ethnic cultures of Poland. But in its history, it was once the town hall of Kazimierz, and this square behind me called Plac Wolnicy, which is just a fraction of the size that it once was almost the size of the square in the old town once upon a time, and it was the center of Kazimierz, and the white building was the town hall. Kazimierz has an amazing rich history, particularly connected with Jewish history. So from its establishment in 1335 through to today, very important connections with the whole sort of Jewish story in Poland, including that of the times of the Holocaust. Steven Spielberg filmed most of Schindler's List in Kazimierz, although the reality is that the Jewish ghetto is just the other side of the river in Podgorze. But today the video is going to focus on a few of the sites in my neighborhood of Kazimierz. On the side of the building that I live in is this plaque memorializing the start of the Jagiellonian University on this very site back in 1364. And that was one of the first universities in Eastern Europe, in fact, one of the first universities in the world. And King Kazimierz himself was instrumental in the foundation of the university. So I'm immediately coming out of my apartment, and this road leading directly off Plac Wolnicy, this is Mostova Street. And at the end of the street there's a bridge, a footbridge. It was made in 2010, or opened in 2010. And if you walk across that footbridge, it leads to an area of Krakow called Podgorze, and that was the site of the Jewish ghetto during World War II. And that's where Schindler's factory is. So that, of course, will have to be the subject of its own separate video. But for today, we're focusing on the Jewish Quarter and Kazimierz, and we're going to go first and check out the former city hall. So even though it's known as the Jewish Quarter, Plac Wolnicy itself actually had more of a Christian community, as evidenced there by this beautiful Christian church, the Church of Corpus Christi. I think I'm going to find today so many things we're going to see, they're going to deserve their own video because there's so much history. But it's important to know, even though it's the Jewish Quarter, the Jewish formed only part of the population here, a significant part obviously, but there was significant Christian history here also. But today mainly going to focus on the Jewish part of the story. So as you come down Krakowska Street, which is a main artery from the old city and Wawel Castle into Kazimierz, you see this steeple, and this is the sign on top of the city. This is on top of the city hall. And as I say, it's a museum now, and again going to be subject, I think it's worth a video all of its own. But let's go see some of the things around the building. Plaque on the side of the building commemorates the arrival of Jewish refugees in Kazimierz during the time of King Kazimierz. So Plac Wolnicy itself, and the red circle marks the spot where we stood now at the museum itself, was also on St. Stanislav's route, which is depicted here in this plaque in the corner of the square. Again, something I think that will get its own video at some point. It's always so cool to be out around here around midday, because the bells ring loud and proud, because there's just so many churches around here. So as I mentioned, this town hall is now, it was kind of refurbished in the 20th century, and it's now a museum, sadly closed at the moment because of the COVID situation. And it's a museum, as I understand it, features talks about sort of the different ethnicities or cultures in Krakow. And the building itself is number 1, Plazwalnica is the address. And there's my home. On the other side of the trees, my address is number 11, Plazwalnica. And there's a very helpful large map right by the door of the museum that depicts the different places of interest in Kazimierz. And that's what we're going to feature today. And the square itself hosts different festivals and gatherings in non-COVID times. So it can be a lot. This is probably it's very quiet right now. And like I said, this is just a mere fraction of the size of what the square was once upon a time. So just off Plazwalnica is a street named after St. Lawrence, and on the top of the street is this beautiful church, the Christian church of Corpus Christi, which I showed a little bit about in an earlier video. But we're going to be walking down this street, which have a few things worth note, and then we're going to end up at a Jewish museum at the bottom. So in the middle of Lawrence Street here, and if you can see, there's tram tracks, and the tram tracks run off the road here. And this is the site of what was formerly the tram depot in the 19th century, and now it's a museum of engineering, and it's a particularly family-friendly museum, so a good place to come with the younger ones if you're visiting Krakow. And what was part of the complex, but now is actually a beer hall and a beer garden. Not looking much like a garden in these winter times of COVID, but I've seen some number of people hanging out here. Looks like it's going to be an interesting place once it reopens. So also on the same street, Judah Food Market, which I filmed in a couple of my earlier videos because it's a very popular space with some really cool food cabins, food trucks, and a great mural over it by an Israeli street artist. So just off Lawrence Street is the Galicia Jewish Museum, with a really splendid mural painted on the side of the building here. It's a museum that tells a story of the Galicia province that was a Jewish province for a couple of centuries. I think it had both sort of Ukrainian and Polish people, and a pretty sort of sobering story in there as well, with tales of the Second World War included as part of it. But also really an important stop on any walking tour or tour of Kazimierz. Okay, so Lawrence Street is at the end there, the Jewish Galicia Museum on the left. Then you walk down a little bit further, and we're going to come here and go across diagonally, and we're looking for the old Jewish synagogue. The old synagogue is the oldest synagogue building still standing in Poland, and it's one of the most precious landmarks of Jewish architecture in Europe. The synagogue itself was built in the 1400s, and the date of the building varies with several different sources. The synagogue was completely devastated and ransacked by the Germans during World War II. During the occupation, a synagogue was used as a warehouse. In 1943, 30 Polish hostages were executed at its wall. There's a beautiful little monument right in front of the synagogue here, marking those events. And then here we have just the other side of the same old Jewish synagogue building. Right next door to the house with the mural. In this building, a family called the Bozak family lived for over 400 years until they were driven out by the Nazis. A mural has been painted on the side, commemorates a number of things, but mainly Irene Sendler, another hero from the wartime who smuggled in medical aid into the ghetto at great personal risk to herself. Well, right next to the old synagogue on Zeroka Street is the town square of Barvol, which became part of Kazimierz. A number of important things on or off this square, but the square itself is beautiful. There's some very charming shops and hotels, as well as some of the most important synagogues and sites down at the other end of the square. Just off the square in Josepha Street, you soon come across this Jewish prayer house dating from the 1800s. And you can still clearly see some of the features on the front of the house. And next door to the prayer house is the High Synagogue, the third oldest synagogue in Krakow, completed in 1563. It's unique for having its prayer room upstairs, and that was speculated that it was designed that way to protect the congregation from unfriendly neighbours. It was pretty ransacked again, unfortunately, during World War II. And this is the king himself, King Kazimierz III, who founded the city and gave his name to it. And here, in one of the pictures of the mural, Sterker. Carol Naus. Helena Rubinstein. And last but not least, Joseph Habsburg. Because believe it or not, Kazimierz formed part of the Austrian Empire once upon a time. So just down from the mural, which is on Corpus Street, come onto Isaac Street, and here is the Isaac Synagogue, dating from the 1600s, and famous for, see, we've got the stairs on either side, which I believe may have something to do with once upon a time men and women had to enter the synagogue different ways. So men entered up the staircase on one side and women on the other. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that and leave me a message or a note if I'm getting anything wrong on this video, but there's the Isaac Synagogue. Again, just a really another interesting historic building. Can you believe this goes back to the 1600s? Doesn't look that old, does it? Back on Zeroka Street is this memorial from the Nissenbaum Foundation to the Polish Jews that were murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust, with a memorial garden surrounded by the buildings of Zeroka Street. And right next to the memorial is the Remo Synagogue and Cemetery, which dates from 1553. It's Krakow's smallest but most active synagogue, which was established by a famous 16th century Polish rabbi, best known as the Remo, and is known particularly for the unique proximity of the old Jewish cemetery next to it. And next to the synagogue is the memorial to Jan Karski, who, as you can see, was a hero who tried to stop the Holocaust. Alongside the synagogue is this ancient Jewish cemetery, which was in use up until 1800. Unfortunately, it was another thing that was just utterly destroyed by the Nazis during World War II. Many of the tombstones were broken and they were built into the wall, which is alongside the cemetery, and the remaining intact tombstones were sort of neatly organized. One of the tombstones that remained intact was that of the rabbi himself, which many interpreted as proof of his miraculous powers. Dating back to 1643 is the Cooper Synagogue, another one that was ransacked by the Nazis, and many of its architectural features were destroyed, known because it has some elements of the original Kazimierz city wall, which can be seen in it. Opened in 2008 by the Prince of Wales, the Jewish Community Centre is the headquarters of Krakow's surviving and now strengthening Jewish community, and it organises numerous events, lectures, exhibits, tours, and community programmes with the aim of rebuilding Jewish life in Krakow. It's a friendly first point of contact for anyone wanting to know more about Krakow's Jewish community. Next door to the Jewish Community Centre is the Temple Synagogue. Temple Synagogue is Kazimierz's newest synagogue, dating back to 1862, although elements were completed as recently as 1924. Under Nazi occupation, the building was used as a warehouse and stables, but it survived the war and regular services were held here until 1968, until they stopped completely a decade later. Since its restoration, the synagogue now plays host to many concerts and occasional religious ceremonies, particularly during the annual Jewish Festival of Culture each summer. Incorporated into the Jewish quarter in the late 17th century, Plac Novi, i.e. New Square, didn't really begin assuming its shape until the late 19th century, when the rotunda in the middle was added. For generations, the square was referred to by the locals as Jewish Square. Not only was it the primary marketplace of the Jewish quarter, but the rotunda itself served as a ritual slaughterhouse for poultry right up until the Nazi occupation. Today, there's butcher shops occupy the interior, but the real activity is outside, where people line up in front of the hole of the wall food hatches to enjoy zapikanki. And the zapikanki itself are very, very popular, a little bit similar to French bread pizzas, and very good value. Located inside a former Jewish prayer house, which was in operation from the 1880s up until World War II. This building was saved from ruin and renovated and then opened up as a Jewish cultural centre in 1993. And then here we are at the end of our tour, right back where we started again, in Plac Wolnica. This is the other side of the museum that was formerly the town hall of Kazimierz, and the square in front of it. So I hope you enjoyed the tour that we had of my new neighbourhood. So that completes the trip of Kazimierz today. And here he is, King Kazimierz. Has his picture on the 50s lottie note. So I guess a pretty important guy in Poland. So we walked around the former city that was named after him. And we started and finished with this place.